Hello and good morning and welcome. It is Wednesday, the 30th of June. We are here today at this SDS webinar to talk about planning. Extremely important for your jobs, as we all know, hence why we have Ruben Young with us today. Now, Ruben Young is the Research and Policy Manager of Network Homes, and he's also the author of the 2020 report on making land deliver. So obviously that's something we can all want to understand a lot better. So thank you very much, Ruben, for appearing. Good morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. And with us today as well, two regular panelists who we get a lot of great stuff from and we really enjoy appearing on this show. We've got Joy Winera, who is the Development and Investment Director at Broadacres. Hello, hi. Joy, welcome.
Hey.
And then we have Duncan Smith, who is quite a star on this show. He's created laughs.
I'm not taking that, Chris. I'm no star. Let's leave that alone, thank you.
Duncan is the part-time comedian and the commercial director of Walsall Housing Group. Thank you very much, Duncan. Very glad to have you here as well. Now, before we get into it, I just want to obviously draw your attention to our website here. If you're joining us for the first time, you can register for updates and you can find a bunch of other very helpful webinars that we've put here for you and to support you in your job role. None of them are chargeable. We also last week had our annual user group meeting where we unveiled our plans for the cloud. We got a sneak preview of what the new Provel cloud interface looks like. We had a look at all the different things we're doing in training, as well as the updates, the big updates that are coming available for Provel and SQL, as well as everything that we have done for our integrated shared ownership CRM Home Match. So there's a huge amount there. The recording is available. It's only obviously available to our users. It's nothing that we're going to be able to post publicly. If you would like to have a copy of that, we're sending it to you. It'll either be myself or my colleague, Ricky Prota. We are both the new business managers at SDS, so it'll be one or the other one that we're talking to. We're not just new business managers, but our existing business managers as well. So our attitude is we are led by you and we are basically just here to support and talk to you and figure out what you want. So that's that. If you have any questions today, please do put them in. You'll notice that the questions are open. Everyone can see everyone's questions. You can put in a question anonymously and you can vote up other questions. So it's a very engaging Q&A section. So hopefully we're going to get lots of engagement and it should be a really good webinar. Okay, so without much further ado, let's go to Ruben.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me. Before we start on the Q&A, the setup I've got here, I can't see it. So can you guys, if something interesting comes up in the middle, can you?
Don't worry, I'm handling all the Q&A, so
fantastic.
I will moderate that element of it.
So awesome, thanks for having me here. As Chris said, my name is Ruben. I'm Research and Policy Manager at Network Homes, which is a G15 housing association. And until very recently, it was the chair of the G15. In my nightlife, my spare time, I also campaign for Priced Out, which is a group that advocates policies that build more homes and reduce housing costs for everyone. So that organization also has strong views on planning. They're usually the same views though. So I'm going to talk a bit today about the planning white paper and what the future planning system might look like. About a year ago, just over a year ago, Network published a report called Making Land Deliver, which looked at 3 key policies that would kind of engender a better land market and build more homes and affordable homes. And one of those recommendations was moving from a Section 106, the way we currently ask developers to contribute to affordable housing, to a flat levy charged on essentially gross development value. So it was very exciting when that became government policy. However, some of the ideas in the white paper are very, very different to the Make Land Deliver ideas. And I'm going to focus less on my blue sky thinking and more on the reality and what the future might look like. but I'm very, very happy to take questions on my much better ideas. So, a caveat is that the planning white paper is really more of a green paper because it sets out some broad ideas and proposals that are in no way finalized. And every person who's read it in detail, like I have, has had quite a wildly different understanding of what it all means. So I'm giving you my interpretation. But because it's open to interpretation and because government is continually talking to people and refining its ideas on this, it may transpire that these ideas aren't 100% bona fide, reliable. Another caveat is that I'm a strategy guy. I've never bought land and I've never applied for planning permission. So there'll be some parts where I think that the audience here will probably know more than me, and I'll be very happy to take questions or comments on the side of it which exists on the ground. So should we go to the next slide? Thanks, Chris. So why are we talking about planning? Why is the government talking about planning? You may have heard it said by the LGA and the Local Government Association and by others that planning is not a key barrier to delivering the homes we need. You may have also heard it said that delivering the homes we need isn't what we need to do, but I'm not even going to touch that one. You'll have heard it said, for example, that developers are sitting on 1 million unbuilt planning permissions. This is quite a pernicious statistic and one that I think is utterly meaningless. One, because we have a housing shortage of about 4 million homes, but moreover because I learned recently that 86% of planning permissions are not even developers who are applying for them. They're landowners or land promoters or other bodies like that. And so I think this is one of those things that a lot of well-meaning but very misguided people throw around to show that planning isn't a problem. You guys probably know more about this than me, but it seems to me that if a planning permission at one site can go through several iterations of planning permissions and they all show up in the stats, that another perhaps more pernicious and more ridiculous stat is that 9 in 10 planning permissions are approved. So how the hell could planning possibly be a barrier? But clearly you don't apply for planning permission unless you're going to get planning permission. 9 in 10 times people buy plane tickets, they probably subsequently end up boarding a plane. That doesn't mean they like waiting in a queue for 5 hours, waking up at 5 a.m. and then finding out their flight's delayed because of a problem with the coffee machine. So next click. Unequivocally, planning is absolutely a problem. And we have the next. I'm not seeing any clicks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is when you say clips?
Click, yeah. There we go. Well, that was my dramatic reveal, but I'm sure
I didn't.
It's not really worked from a visual perspective.
There we go. Thanks. I'm done. So let's go to the next slides. So I'm not going to spend too long on I put too many animations in this. There's too many clicks. Okay, I'm not going to spend too long on the current planning permission system because you probably all know it quite well. But let's just race forward with the next like 3 clicks or 4 clicks. There we go. This is fun. So we have a planning system at the moment which has a system of local plans. So local areas decide and consult with their residents on what's going to go on in their area, and these set out in theory rules for developers to get on and build. But they're currently extremely long, they're extremely complicated, and probably most importantly, they're extremely inconsistent. And what a local plan in one borough or local authority area will have in its local plan is not even comparable to what the next one overdoes, which I imagine, and you guys can correct me or tell me I'm right and everything's perfect in my presentation about this. But I think that's probably extremely difficult for developers to navigate. And I think probably it's also extremely difficult for residents because these things aren't friendly, they're not intuitive, they're not transparent. So not only do they not have clear rules in place that are fixed, but what they're more like guidelines, they're also extremely hard to understand for every actor in the process, including probably councils. Planning permissions. In the present system, every new home we build is subject to a political approval process. No other industry does this. When we're building new cars, for example, you don't need a permit for every new car that you build. And even if there are rules in place about the safety measures and the types of cars we want to see, you wouldn't have to then traverse an additional process, which is beset with delays and problems and uncertainty in order to just deliver the product you want to deliver for the people you want to deliver it to. They're also scarce in the sense that there's a hell of a lot of land, which is clearly would be extremely beneficial to use for housing, but can't be by our own rules and edicts. The green belt is the biggest example of this, which I'll chat a little bit more on later. And the whole process just conspires to make everything uncertain. About 20 years ago, small and medium-sized builders delivered about 40% of new homes, and now they deliver about 10%. And we have an oligopoly of large developers, which is its own problem for creating high housing costs and potentially drip feeding the market by no fault of the developers themselves, but that's the system they operate in. The incentives are stacked in a way because there are so few of them. That means homes can't be delivered as fast as they could be. And every time anyone has asked small builders in any research what's happened, they always cite the complexity and risk inherent in the planning system for the reason that they're struggling.
Rube, can I come in at that point and just add another grenade into your well-articulated slide, which is the NPPF, identified a duty to cooperate, which I felt was going to be a really good tool in sorting out people working together to deliver the amount of housing that we need. Is your experience the same in mind, that the duty to cooperate is a duty to fight about where housing should be put as a detriment to the adjoining local authority area? Because it just seems to turn into this bun fight of nonsense from people going, we'll have anything, but let's not have any more housing here. It's just mental.
Yes, it absolutely gives rise to NIMBYism, essentially, because that's what it is. Clearly, well, I think it's important to have some kind of cross-boundary planning in place. So the duty to cooperate is an extremely well-meaning policy, which clearly has utterly failed because huge swathes of the country don't even have local plans. And this is why. The duty to cooperate is probably the biggest reason that plans get rejected because they don't meet it. And it's also the reason why they take so long to prepare, because as you say, there's so much squabbling.
And at political level as well. And your point about the politics of it is just so absolutely on point, because the politics adds a layer that nobody needs. If the application meets the policy, should be approved. Why should the politics be anywhere near it at all? Sorry.
And it's and that segues nicely into the democratic element, because the way democracy and rules interact in our planning system, in a way, couldn't be conceivably worse, because you can have local opposition to a development, but the local opposition has to be based on material which is in some sense a rule somewhere, and so you'll have a bunch of people who are scared that the house price is going to rise, who write in and say, oh, you may fail on this minor point. You'll have some that just write in and say, my house price is going to rise. Sorry, fall. And I hope that the planning committees do what they should do and ignore those ones. But there's a lot of others who will find other things that are wrong. But if they are rules-based, then why are people, residents, the final or main arbiters of that? Surely there is enough competence, or there could be enough competence in councils to interpret rules as they're written. So land use is inherently political, and so there needs to be some elements of democracy. The way we do democracy now is that local people who by definition already have homes in the area get a say, and they tend to not be the most supportive bunch. And that's understandable, because there are material reasons why you may not want a development to happen opposite you. It's going to be loud and noisy while it's going up. It's going to crowd your roads, sure. All of those things are, in a way, legitimate problems for the people that they affect. But what is not represented in the planning system is the voice of the millions of people living around the country who could potentially be the beneficiaries of that development, who of course are not going to write in support of developments across the country just because there's a small chance that that might be where they end up living.
Ruben, I think it'd be really interesting as well that if we knew about in terms of tenure, because in theory, you know, MPPF, etc., the rules are the rules. As Duncan said, it should be, if it meets policy, it meets policy. But certainly in terms of the consultation element and NIMBYism, you know, where we're developing 100% affordable schemes, and the strength of opposition to that perhaps versus the strength of opposition to a private development of 4 and 5 bedroom detached executive properties, perhaps. I think that interests me as well, because in theory we shouldn't have to state what tenure our properties are when we're putting in a planning permission, but we do, because we want to be clear and transparent on, and you know, consultation is important to us. But actually, as you've said, where the consultation isn't truly consultation, it's not truly democratic consultation. It's just interesting to me to see how those consultations then are taken into account in the decision making. Yeah, just based on tenure.
Yeah, that's right. And I've heard it said both ways, that affordable homes versus private homes are more objectionable to local people. Certainly to people, market homes seem more objectionable, but to local people, so people commenting on national policies or on Twitter or whatever will say, you know, we don't want to be building all of these homes, hardly any of them are going to be affordable. But when it actually gets down on the ground, and I'd be interested to hear from the audience what their perceptions is of this. On the ground, it seems like it's more the other way around, and I've seen some abhorrent like leafleting against you know, social housing and the clients who live there.
I can only echo that, Ruben, and Joy will know this because her predominantly working in rural areas, Joy, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of my career in rural areas. Affordable housing is persona non grata in rural areas, and that is generally based, I suggest again, on the politics of the people who are living in existing villages and hamlets, which is, I bought this property here to maintain my house price. I vote in a specific way. I'm not going to make it political, and I don't want any poor people coming to live in my village, right? Let's be really clear. That's the message, and I think that's utterly abhorrent.
So what we're talking about here is NIMBYism, and how he has a really disproportionate effect on the people trying to get planning, and of course the people who want the houses are totally silent in all of this, aren't they? Yeah. My colleague Ricky just put in a point here, just in terms of the current planning system. We're all aware of the threat of NIMBYism. Another one though is a recent article in the MSM suggests that 3 biggest house builders such as Taylor Wimpey, etc., function like cartels. They hold over 1 million plots to keep demand high and make higher profits. What are your thoughts on this accusation?
Yeah. So there is an oligopoly of developers who have too much market power. Clearly, I blame the planning system for that, and not the developers. When it comes to the sort of issue of land banking and do developers hoard land and then drip feed the market? I'm agnostic about that, because clearly when you have a very risky business, you need some kind of pipeline for the next 3 years at least. And so I don't know. I think if the planning system were better and there were more land allocated for housing and it was less risky, you'd probably see less of that. So I think I don't disagree, but I think, do blame don't hate the players, hate the game for sure.
Yeah, I again, forgive me for coming in on that, Chris.
Well,
I'm not going to talk about Taylor Wimpey. I'm not going to talk about house builders generally, but certainly from our sector's perspective, if we were to look at a piece of what I would describe as strategic land, so something to promote through the planning process, and looking at the horizon of doing that presently, which could be in a region of 10 to 15 years, then I'm going to spend a lot of money at this particular point to get it back in 15 years' time, and that's a particularly risky thing to do. Now, if the system changed to allow me to do that more efficiently, or I wasn't promoting the land up front, somebody else was doing, somebody was enabling that, then great, fantastic. But that's then who is going to do that function. I respectfully suggest that local authorities are neither well funded enough or impartial enough, shall we say, to do that, because individual landowners will benefit as a consequence. But if I'm telling my business that I need to invest X million pounds on doing X million plots over 15 years, then I've got to expect a big return at the end of that, and therefore I understand why those house builders would hang on to that land for that length of time.
Right. The last salient fact of the current planning system that I'll talk about. So far, I've been saying things that everyone agrees with and being very kind to developers, but I'm going to change gear here. Section 106 is a great system in the way that it delivers more on-site developer contributed affordable homes than any we've ever had, and it's functioning better than it ever has right now. But that doesn't mean it couldn't be better, and there is this may speak back to the oligopoly point, or it may just be a function of the profit motive. But there is an industry that has been created out of negotiating down affordable housing contributions, and the national system of viability we have is a way that it is a tool for developers to use to ensure that they can minimize the homes for those in the most housing need as much as possible, and that's inherent in the fact that it's a negotiation-based system. Essentially, you have, as you said, quite underfunded local authorities who are trying to enforce policies in their local plans that are by definition unenforceable because of the national primacy of viability. And so you have house builders who minimize those contributions sometimes to zero. And there must be a better way to do this. Clearly, you buy land, you apply for planning permission, you start building the homes. This is not a instant process building a home. There's a temporal element to it, and so within that time, variables will shift. House prices will shift. Your projected costs will shift. All manner of things change, and the current system means that when things change, it is affordable homes that gets boots. There must be a way to make it developer profits to get the boot, but without making the development industry as a whole unprofitable. I feel like there's a lot of gap there, because clearly the development industry at the moment is very profitable.
It's really funny, River, because there is no stronger advocate of Section 106 on-site delivery of affordable housing than yours truly. I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. Your point is well made about the level, but I think your previous point about don't hate the player, hate the game is absolutely key at this point. Is the game is to find ways round delivering on site. However, the corollary is that actually developers love us and our cash and what they need from us as we buy their Section 106, because it gives them cash flow during the development. So actually, there's a balance for them between getting affordable housing contributions to as low as possible to needing our cash to fund their development. And again, we won't get into that. Can Section 106 be better? Absolutely. No problem with that whatsoever. But that's around how the plan making process starts. Okay, that's around having local authorities understanding viability. And I'm not being disrespectful by saying this, they just don't. And therefore, the viability industry, shall we say, needs to be just as strong in the plan making process as it is strong in the negotiating away the affordable housing process. And it needs to be balanced with, come on, let's get a standard way of looking at viability that works for both of those things, so that at the end of the process, it's not as confused as it is at the beginning. And we set achievable targets in particular areas and particular marketplaces, taking into account those local factors to get that affordable housing percentage right. If you do that, you shouldn't be negotiating away anything.
So I agree with the sense of what you're saying. I think a system like Section 106 will always be less good at delivering that than a levy, which we'll come on to later. But the reason that developers do this is essentially so they can compete for land better, right? Because the landowner is going to sell, if he's going to sell to the highest bidder. And so it's an intensely competitive market where everyone is wanting to cut anything they can in order to buy that land. And as long as there is any flexibility at all in affordable housing provision, there will be some parts of that land value which is higher than it should be in a perfect world where everyone follows the rules. And as soon as that happens, you open the door for viability to be a reason to.
Again, I agree 1,000% in terms of the process, but it's not just affordable housing anymore. So we're going to see it very much in terms of sustainability going forward. How is that going to be paid for? Well, it should be paid for as a consequence of money coming off the land value. And it's about finding the mechanisms to get that through to the end point, because the landowner should be paying for all of those things. Absolutely 100%. So if we do the work in the plan making process up front and identify what that is and say there is no option to negotiate because we've got a robust viability position up front, that should give you the outcomes and then give you the on-site delivery too.
I think it's interesting that we're, for Section 106 is obviously we're discussing the affordable housing here, but actually there's so much more that goes into a Section 106, yet for me at least, they seem to be non-negotiable. So if you're making a highways contribution, non-negotiable. If there's an educational contribution, non-negotiable. All of the, if you have to build a new roundabout, non-negotiable. You knew that before you set off, Mr. Developer. That's, Mr. Mrs. Developer. That's set. Yet affordable housing, time and time again, is the flex. That is the flex point. Why is that the flex point all the time? Yeah, don't hate the players, hate the game, because that has been set in such a way. And we know that there are developers who, when we're competing for land, will be saying to the landowner, and don't worry, we'll be negotiating the Section 106, the affordable housing contribution. And obviously we're saying we absolutely won't do that. In fact, we're going to increase the affordable homes contribution. But, the price that we're giving you now is absolutely the land price we can afford, whereas a developer is giving you a promise of, it's this right now, but if we can do X, Y, and Z, it'll be more. And that's really hard to work with because of that absolute swing that a landowner's going to say, well, not always, but a lot of the time, well, actually, if I can hang out for that and we get that affordable housing contribution down to nil, fantastic.
And the real swing at the end of that, Joy, is if you get, as we are sometimes working in communities where values are really low and construction costs are reasonable, we would negotiate down Section 106 contributions to 0 to have a free site to bring in grant to deliver 100% affordable housing. So it actually works in completely the opposite way for us too.
Yeah, that's a different kind of negotiating Section 106. But yeah, I see what you mean.
Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on, I just want to say really quickly, Alex Francis has said that, in terms of the NIMBYism, which we were just discussing on that point, it's more complex than that. They would not object if they felt community services were keeping up with the development. Alex, I want to come back to that at the end of this, because I think there is a lot more to talk about with NIMBYism. So we will definitely come back, but for the moment, we will carry on.
So I would characterize the current system as essentially discretion with some rules. Nothing is fixed, and everything is, well, most things are done either by negotiation at some level, either between developers and councils, or councils and their residents, or just to politicians. There are some rules in local plans, but they don't have any teeth. But should we go next? So the planning white paper. Let's skip forwards 1, 2, 3, I think. Yeah, that's it. So there are 3 parts to this in my view, pretty excellent consultation paper that came out last year. The first is, pillar 1 is about changing the system of building homes in the aggregate and moving away from a system where you have a plan and then some discretion to a very, they don't use the word zoning once in the white paper, but that's clearly what they mean. By area-based plan, they mean zoning. So that the proposal is to zone every parcel of land in a local authority area, one of 3 ways. Protection, as so far as I understand it, means the same thing as it does in the current system. So as in, the protection zones will be subject to the planning system as it is now. There's nothing that will allow you a fast track development. You can apply for permission. If it's a green belt, you probably won't get it. If it's not, you might do. But the other 2 zones is are the new bits. Growth zones will be areas potentially of more rural sites where kind of new towns could pop up. My reading of the white, or my hopeful reading of the white paper, is actually that growth zones could also be urban areas which are built on already, and developers could just get on with it there too. But essentially, in growth zones, you get automatic permission. That's if you follow rules. That's essentially the crux of it. There's no discretion. Clearly, it's not going to be a free-for-all. You'll still need to conform to building regulations and all of that side. But the local authority will set rules about density and about height and about all the rest of it. And if you meet the rules, you will be guaranteed that your planning permission, that you'll be able to build the homes there. This is how most of the world does planning. This is not radical stuff, but it is apparently radical here. The other one, which is the most variously understood, is the renewal zones, which seems on the face of it a bit like the growth zones, because you'll get automatic permission, but you won't always get automatic permission. You'll have to meet certain thresholds that conform to things like local design codes and things that happen potentially after the plan is in place. That's how I read it anyway. Other people have very different understandings. But the crux of it is we're moving from a discretionary based system to a rules-based zoning system, which is great. And it's how most of the world does planning, and most of the world has better housing outcomes than us. The 2 probably are somehow related. Pillar 2 is about making sure the homes are sustainable and good quality and meet the local people's requirements of them. So this links back to the renewal zones, because the proposal is for local communities to come together and set rules which are not about whether things can be built, but about what they should look like and what sustainability and other metrics they need to meet. And then the final pillar, which is the one that I've spent the most time thinking about, is this move from Section 106 to a levy-based system. So the idea is that rather than negotiating with the council ahead of time about how many affordable homes you'll provide, there will be a rate that is set out in a local plan. Say it's 5% over a certain threshold, and that will be levied on some form of the gross development value. The proposal in the white paper, which seems like what it will ultimately become, is it will be levied on achieved sales values, which is a bad idea, because by definition, when you've achieved your sales value, there's no homes left to use for affordable housing. And so if you want to deliver on-site affordable housing, you'll have to negotiate that and decide that earlier with different actors in the process, which in my view is counterproductive to the goals of the white paper, which is to take as much negotiation as possible out and front load the process so people can get on with it. I'm not going to dwell too much on that though. The principle of levying a flat rate instead of a negotiation-based system, as we kind of touched on earlier, I think the main benefits are it will factor into land values one for one, because you know there's no element of discretion that you can that you'll have to guess at later on in the process. If the levy is 5%, that's what you'll plug into your viability calculations to decide what you whether you can buy the land. The current system isn't so simple as that. So that will have a positive effect on land values in that it will be priced into land better. I think if implemented right, it will also have a positive effect on affordable homes, because as I said, as we discussed, affordable homes are the current thing that flexes. There is room for, so earlier we talked about landowners and their profits, and I 100% agree that the fundamental design of any model should have the landowner paying for stuff, which is in a perfect world what would happen, because developers obviously pay for land based on their costs, and so when you increase costs for all developers, in theory actually they fall on the land costs, the landowner. But because of this temporal element of building homes, there will be times where things flex after you've already paid the landowner. And that's where the affordable housing flex comes in, and that's where it shouldn't. At that point, it should be the developer profits that flex, because when you build in a margin of 10% or whatever for risk and contingency, that's what it is. It's risk and contingency. If house
yeah,
prices,
but in the developer's case, Ruben, that's not 10%. Let's be clear; it's more like 30. I absolutely take your point that the levy has an elegant simplicity about it, and it truly does. But the danger is in that elegant simplicity is that you price people like Joy and I out of delivering any affordable housing as a consequence of that, because we can't get hold of the land to deliver, even with the levy or the money from the levy. We can't get hold of the land, and we can't compete with the development industry. So you have that cyclical of, you've got an elegant simplicity, we've got some cash, but we can't buy any land and we can't deliver any affordable housing, and that's the corollary to the proposal.
That's the risk for sure, and so the variable that depends on is the levy rates and how it changes by area. Clearly, the best way to do it, which would retain the most benefits that the Section 106 system has, is to base your, when you're setting your local plan, because the levy rates are probably going to be set locally, because that's what everyone said in their consultation responses. When you're setting your local plan, the council will set levy rates, and the main thing that will affect the rate will be some proxy for the existing use value, whether it's a greenfield and a brownfield rate, or just a different rate for the current use class of what's on the land. If you do that, I think that problem would go away or largely be mitigated.
Yeah, look, we could get into the viability discussion, and that all that's going to promote is SDS selling their products to assess viability, Ruben. So let's leave it out there. But let's talk about mixed and balanced communities. I want to say this statement, and I think everybody would agree. The success of Section 106 is eradicating us and them, right? And this, in terms of paying cash and not having on-site delivery, is promoting us and them. And we fought against that for decades. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting it's wrong. What I'm suggesting is we have to have some mechanism to make anybody, any developer, any promoter include some on-site affordable housing. Otherwise, we'll end up with that economy of us and them again.
I totally agree, and I agree that the proposal, as it is in the white paper, doesn't do this well enough. And they propose a mechanism for offsetting some levy payments, including some on-site affordable. I'm with you. I don't think that it's fit for purpose in the form that they published last year, and I think it needs to be better. The Making Land Deliver proposals, which maybe I'll, for this time, will come on to later, are much better because they will deliver on-site affordable housing with a levy. Let's move on to the next slides.
Thanks, Ruben. Just before we do, we've got a couple more statements on NIMBYism here. It certainly is something we're getting back to, so thank you for that. We will go back to that at the end. Rob Chambers, where does SIL sit in regards to these discussions?
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me for always forgetting about SIL because I work for a housing association. SIL will be, the proposal is to also roll SIL into the new levy. So it'll be section 106 and SIL that's replaced. This is quite another reason why the proposals are actually very good, because at the moment SIL isn't spent on affordable homes, and in the new world there'll be more homes built, which will mean a greater overall take, and B, there'll be because there'll be a broader base for the sorts of stuff you can tax and spend on affordable homes. There's a big scope for delivering more affordable homes. Granted, I come from a housing association, and so I probably give affordable homes a lot of thought, infrastructure less thought. So there's an inherent risk in that as well, if you like infrastructure. But I think there's more benefit than this benefit.
Okay, next slide.
So yeah, let's click once more and twice more and three. Actually, yeah, that's four there, and one more click. Yes. So the new system, with the caveat that they might change it all before it actually gets delivered, they want to deliver much shorter and more simple local plans, which is great because they're too long and too complex. However, I am quite skeptical that the idea of front-loading the process and making the local plans have more teeth and be more influential can coexist with also making them, 2 slides. So and the government's frankly quite ridiculous 3-year proposal for the start to finish, how long it will take these plans to be drawn up. The whole idea is we want these plans to be really, really good. So they can't be rushed. And I don't think I think it was Einstein who probably never said, you want to explain something as simply as you can, but no more simply than that. So I think there's some question there, but the premise that they're consistent is the main thing, and area-based is great too. With planning permissions, as we covered, that they're automatic if developers follow the rules, which is how virtually everywhere else in the world does planning. The proposals have got a lot of flack from a lot of different type stakeholders for the democratic elements, because the idea that residents can vote on a local plan and influence things that way and then not get a say when a developer builds something that conforms with the local plan, I think is quite scary to people. But I think it's very important that we have a national target of 300,000 homes a year, and that needs to be divided up among local authority areas somehow. And if your local council needs 2,000 new homes, sure, let the local people decide where they go, what they look like, whether you build high or build out. But I think it's a huge mistake of the current system to give local people power to veto new homes, essentially, which this system moves away from. And then the affordable homes. So there are risks in the levy-based system for sure, but it will undoubtedly deliver more certainty for councils, and in fact all actors in the process. I'm with Duncan that we need to square the circle of on-site affordable homes, which I don't think the white paper does very well. Next slide, unless there's any comment. So I think the new system will be rules with some discretion. That local authorities will essentially negotiate their local plans with their residents, which is great because it maintains democracy. Protection zones will essentially be the same as the current system, so there'll be discretion. But most things will be rules-based. Most things, there'll be transparent things to follow, and if you follow them, you can build the homes we need, which is clearly a step in the right direction. Next slide, or is that, I can't remember, that's the last one actually. Oh yeah, cool. So that's it. I just kind of threw together some interesting things, most of which I've mentioned. So if you share the slides with the audience later, they'll be able to.
Everyone will be getting an email follow up with these slides.
Shameless plug for the Priced Out podcast, which we just released the next 4 parts of. There's some really interesting discussions there. Philip, the episode with Philip Barnes, the Group Land and Planning Director at Barratt, is absolutely, well, for me who doesn't work for a private developer, and for a lot of my colleagues at Priced Out, absolutely fascinating to learn about the specific process of the development model. And essentially the debate with Lord Kerslake that we did last year, because he's not a fan of the white paper at all, is also very good. So I encourage everyone to listen to that.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruben. That was absolutely fantastic. It's provoked a lot of discussion. I'm just going to come back now to the comments from before. So this is one here from Caroline Dibden. Perhaps the development industry would be much more likely to get local people on side for new housing, especially affordable housing, if they didn't always label any objector in a pejorative fashion as a NIMBY. Many, agree not all, our objectors have what they believe are valid reasons, such as transport, not just more car dependency, the environment, climate change, biodiversity, lack of affordable housing for local people, as Ruben was saying, RE section 106. So is it wrong? Is NIMBYism a term we should stop using? Is it wrong to put everyone who objects in the same boat? Are there some people who are using these valid reasons as general excuses for not wanting affordable housing in their area? What would you say the percentage is, and how would you reform an approach?
I couldn't a percentage, Chris, because I think that would be a pejorative, and I think it totally depends on the scheme, and it completely depends on the area and lots of things. Absolutely not everybody who objects to a planning permission is a NIMBY. Absolutely, a NIMBY is a specific term for a specific type of objector, shall we say. And for me, all of those points that were raised are absolutely spot on, and if we can, local lettings policies, for example, services that are being provided, contributions that are being made, etc. Specifically rural areas, it tends to be the opposite of that, because actually people are crying out for families to move back into areas to support the local services that are there, the schools, the shops, the restaurants, that kind of thing. But there is still a small percentage of people who do not want that housing, whether it be because it's social housing or whatever it is, that there is that portion which that is NIMBY. But no, absolutely not all objectors are NIMBYs. But I also think it goes back to that earlier point that we made, that actually the planning consultation process currently is really very narrow in terms of how people can object and what they can object to. Actually, as housing associations, consultation sessions are fantastic, because we can pick up little things that the community are really annoyed about, or we can put things into our planning permissions that really address community concerns that are nothing to do with planning. Actually, they wouldn't, they're not a planning concern, but we can pick it up and do something about it, and that's fantastic. But that's because that's what we do. We're invested in that area. The chances are we're developing stock which we're going to retain for the next, hopefully, 150, 200 years. So that's why we care about it. But if you are a private developer, you are there to make sure that you have ticked all of the consultation boxes from a planning perspective. And that is the downfall in that consultation process, is that actually, does it really address a lot of the community concerns? Probably not, and it depends on the developer or the planning applicant to listen to the actual results that are coming out of the consultation that aren't necessarily planning reasons for non-approval or through that process.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. NIMBYism clearly exists, and it's baked into the system, because most people agree England needs more homes. and most local objectors don't want the homes near them. So clearly there's something going on there. Like I totally agree that, you know, not all objectors are NIMBYs, but all NIMBYs are objectors, and I don't think it's a small, necessarily a small part of that. For example, you know, people talk about building on, if you propose building on a greenfield land, a green belt or whatever outside London, people will say, we need to do brownfield first, we can't erode the countryside. And then when you propose an infill site in Wembley or whatever, people will say our GP surgery is overcrowded. You know, there's too much traffic on. Well, if you build it somewhere with a car park, they'll say we don't want more cars here. If you build something without a car park, they'll say the transport infrastructure is already too overcrowded, the public transport. So I agree with the sense of the question that not everyone is a NIMBY, but you can't write off NIMBYism as a thing, I suppose.
Can I push you for an estimate of the percentage of people who you think will be using a number of potentially, you know, objections, that some of which have some weight, others don't, but they can always seem to find as many as they need. What percentage would you think, Ruben, are NIMBYs out of the bunch of objectors, that out of any particular group?
That's a good question, and I'm not going to answer it, but I think it would be really interesting to, as I have done a couple of times, to go through, because all objections are public, right? So you can actually look and see why people are objecting to a specific development. So maybe there's a good research idea in there somewhere that we could literally go and check.
I'll proffer a suggestion, Chris. Two statements. A, depends how well funded they are, and B, whether they have a planning consultant who lives in the village, because those are two normally ticks in boxes about how they can coordinate themselves to object on a planning basis with viable, sensible objections that have a planning policy hook. That normally happens, and then you have, let's be fair, the randomers who've been to the pub and then come to a parish council meeting and voice their objections in a fairly leery manner as well. But anyway, that's just an aside.
You have sophisticated objectors, and then you have the more
unsophisticated objectors.
The more sophisticated, connected ones are the ones who will cause the most trouble, right?
Yeah, agreed. But you're leaders of this in our country. So dear Boris's conundrum with the white paper is, what do I do next? Because he's got a backbench rebellion on his hands. And let's be fair, there's no more NIMBYs than backbenchers. And they are representing the NIMBYs in their communities that are basically saying, if you bring in this system, you will make the current government unre-electable or unelectable. I don't know how to structure that word, but I'm going to go. Your chances of getting elected again next time, Boris, are going to be limited.
Yeah,
and I think that's a huge groundswell of whether this goes forward. Ruben, I don't know whether you have some thoughts on that before we go forward.
Yes, I agree. I agree with all that, and it seems to me that if we lived in a world where Labour and Lib Dems and the other parties also wanted these proposals to go ahead, then the points that the backbenchers would score would be scored not by being successful in their attempts to thwart the white paper, but only in their opposition. So Boris could just do it anyway, you know, and the backbenchers wouldn't lose any, you know, love from their residents, and everyone will be happy. But so I'm quite frustrated that the other parties haven't got behind this, because that their opposition, which is extremely misguided, gives rise to the problem that they make the Conservative government have to pander to the Conservative backbenchers.
Yeah. So we'll see how that translates into what we end up with, because as you said, Ruben, it's a bit more green than white as a paper, and we might have some, I don't know, spray paint that goes on in the middle. We might end up with a blue or something like that. I don't know. There's probably a connotation to a blue paper.
Yeah, we know that Boris is a populist.
Indeed.
That is clear for all.
Indeed. And I think in this, we've kind of forgotten about maybe some really important people, and rarely words escape my lips of this nature, but I feel a little bit sorry for local authorities, right? Because the NPPF came out, they were asked to do a thing. Not everybody, not every local authority has done that thing properly, make a plan. They've also then not been, shall we say, made by national government to make a plan sufficiently. So we don't really know in all areas of the country whether the current system has worked effectively, because not everybody's got a plan. And that's a really bad place to start. So again, no criticism, Ruben, but that's just my observation, as you can imagine. And there has rarely been organisations in the world that have less funding and less opportunity to do a good job of making that plan-making process a result, because they just haven't got the people, the resources. You know, there's an enormous amount of work that has to go into making a plan. Right, so they have my sympathy, and I think overall, and this is not about money, but having the understanding that local authorities need more resources to do a better job in the planning system is also a fundamental pillar for me in whatever is proposed as the end of white paper, because there are local challenges. National government doesn't know everything about where I work in Walsall, it just doesn't, or where Joy or where you work, Ruben, and therefore those local considerations and where people can be heard, their opinions in the plan making process is very, very important. And also then it's about engagement, because just as you said, Ruben, you don't get people who don't have a house commenting on the viability of an actual application. You don't have any enthusiastic people contributing towards making local plans, because it's a really tedious subject. Let's be honest. I'm not going waving my neighbourhood planning flag, going, "Oh, I'd like to be involved in every neighbourhood plan," because it's a tedious process. So there has to be some facilitation to get that balance of views if we're going to do it, and local authorities have got to have more money, right? And also then I think there's an education slant that if we're going to have an education system to make new planners, then they have to be educated in balancing that system. And I think there's always a disparity or a latency in terms of the individuals who are coming out of planning degrees and into roles. And everybody starts generally in a local authority to understand development control, which is that horrible world of we need to make sure that everything's fine and you can't have a planning permission because it's a negative mindset, and it needs to be a positive mindset. And that's, I think, the thing that comes from the white paper, which is eminently supportable. Pillar 1, Pillar 2, I'm absolutely fully in support of that endeavour, coupled with the local authorities. Pillar 3, we've got to find a way to make it on site and up front and mixed and balanced communities.
We have a way. They're just they're not persuaded by me.
I'm persuaded by you, Ruben. So if you need my support, I will help you unequivocally.
If anyone wants some bedside reading, that one of the links in there was the network's response to the white paper. Our response to Pillar 3 sets out in some detail how a levy is designed to deliver on-site affordable homes. Probably not worth reading because it probably won't happen, but it's good anyway.
Thank you. Okay, so I will say there is a lot of energy I see online. It's just in the form of memes, though. Of, oh, I've got a great job now. I finally got a good job. Can you afford to buy a house? There's lots of stuff like that flying around. There is a huge amount of negative energy with all of the people who are now in their 20s and 30s who are looking at coming onto the property market. It's just unfocused and it's slacktivism. It's just posting sarcastic memes. They're not actually organizing and doing anything. So perhaps we can try and, put them together or start some sort of initiative. I don't know. That's just a thought. We've got loads of questions coming in here.
There is one such initiative. It's called Priced Out. So I encourage anyone who wants to organize in this vein to check out our website and get in touch.
Priced Out. Okay, thank you, Ruben. That's certainly really interesting. We'll certainly look into that later and share that. So just a comment here from anonymous attendee. A good presentation. However, what are your thoughts on a significant percentage of planning permissions not progressed to delivery? The intention more often is to sell land with permission for higher profit. This may suggest a bigger problem here.
Yes, so I presume this person came in late because yeah, the kind of unbuilt permissions and sitting on permissions question, I think is broadly a myth, because most planning permissions aren't achieved by housing developers. They're achieved by land promoters, and that's a problem. But it's not, back to the game and the players metaphor. Developers, I gather, are quite cautious people, and it's probably because of the planning system that they're so cautious. But without land promoters, I don't think developers would actually be able to build anywhere near as many homes. So I don't think that there are all of these unbuilt permissions that developers are just deciding not to build on. I think it just looks that way because of the incentives and the way people make decisions in the system, if that makes sense. I'm not sure that answers the question fully.
That's okay. Anyone else want to comment on that before we move on?
Why not have a radical idea of making all delivery in this country affordable, and therefore eliminating any profiteering at all?
That leads us into a next question. Well, a next statement here from Rob Chambers. Thank you, Rob. This is quite good. Joe Public does not understand process of a local plan. As a generalization, they think affordable homes means council homes, which brings thoughts of poorly maintained, this is the stigma, eyesore, housing stock. They are cross about lack of amenities being provided, schools, doctors, dentists. They're worried about flooding and extra road transport. So affordable is under this treated with the same stigma as council. So social rent has the stigma. That stigma applies to affordable as well, if you use that term.
Yeah, look, the point is I don't think wasted on any of us. The issue is the stigma is provided maybe from a perception that stems from 40 years ago. Let's be fair with Joy and my delivery. Our new affordable homes are more energy efficient than their private sector counterparts. They are occupied by people who in the main work, who don't cause antisocial behaviour. We are delivering shared ownership options where people can buy now in the new shared ownership model as little as 10% of the equity in their home. They have a duty to manage and maintain their own properties, just as the private sector person does. We're housing good human beings. Let's be really clear. In the main, and then there are, as there are in society, a few bad apples who give rise to this stigma, and everybody thinks that what we do is housing poor people who hate each other and fight on a Saturday night out in the street. It's not like that, but we can't change that stigma unless we can demonstrate it over time. And that's the thing that Joy was talking about earlier with consultation is, we can turn around as organisations and say, we do these things. We deal with antisocial behaviour like this. We've got a new community housing model, which talks about more positivity of the strengths of a community than it does about the problems in the community, to try and change that perception. But that takes time, Chris. It takes an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of trust from communities as well, because sometimes one incident can colour 500 homes, which is a horrible, horrible thought, but it happens like that. So it's got to be taken as a balance. And that's why I go back to my point about that mixed and balanced community. We've got to have people going, affordable is fine, and it's fine next door, and my next door neighbour's a nice person and I get on with them, even though I paid 500 grand and they pay 120 quid a week.
Yeah, I also think, Chris, there is confusion because there's so many products now, rent to buy, shared ownership. Now we've got first homes, we've had discount market sale. And, even for people who are in the sector, it is confusing. You've now got, we are potentially going to have a site which has two models of shared ownership running alongside each other. So 50% of those shared ownership customers are not going to have their properties maintained. They'll have had to buy 25%. Next door, you can have somebody who's only bought 10% and their property is being maintained for the next 10 years. Now, whichever model you believe is right or correct is irrelevant here. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the the constant reinvention of what affordable homes are, and the constant, you know, looking for this panacea of how do we get first-time buyers, you know, onto the property ladder, and this switch and change constantly of what that looks like and how we offer that, is not helpful. That is just not helpful for Joe Public, who just wants to understand what is available to me, what help can I get, because I cannot currently afford to buy on the open market. And at the moment, we have got so much confusion about what is available, you know, even the difference between affordable and social rent. What does that actually mean to people in the street? Nothing. It means nothing. All it means is to us lot who are sitting doing our, you know, pro-val viabilities, whether or not that's got a higher, you know, rent, and whether or not we can get grant on it. That's the difference. But to anybody out there in the street, what does that mean? It means nothing. It just means confusion and not about what is this that's being developed next to me, or what is it that I can actually access? Which of this housing that's being developed is actually relevant to me and can I access as, you know, a home for me in perpetuity?
I think that's right. And also the social affordable distinction, particularly because people don't understand it. People who either do or don't understand it often use the social rent homes that are delivered, and they say we've only delivered, you know, 6,000 last year, when actually it was, you know, close to 40,000 homes that are meeting the same need, even if they are often more expensive.
I agree with everything that's been said, especially Joy's articulation. Too much confusion, too little simplicity, and too little information available for customers.
Yeah. Just another one here. Just move on a bit. When local councillors, anonymous, when local councillors are holding up a local plan for their own means. So we're talking about a rogue local councillor who is using his position of power to fulfill his self-interest. We know they exist. Everyone who's dealt with councillors know that this is certainly something that a lot of you may deal with at one point or another in your career. Is there anything in the white paper that would enable a local plan to be agreed if you had a councillor acting against it?
The main stick in the paper is that it's a bit vague as to how they'll do this, but they want to mandate all local authorities do this in some specified timescale. It doesn't elaborate on what happens if they don't, so I don't know. But I think that there's a sense in there that they understand that sort of problem. Yeah, I don't know whether they've thought through fully how to tackle it though. I'm not sure how to tackle it either. To be honest, I probably try to bake into the plan making process some kind of what do they call it in the States? Separation of powers.
Oh, yeah, so we're looking at essentially a voting system where, and that is the way that you would deal with that, but that can't happen right now. Can one local councillor cause a huge amount of trouble if their ulterior motives are?
Oh, now, yes, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that, again, the one thing that I would cling on to as being very successful from the current NPPF approach to 5-year housing land supply is the amount of housing that has been artificially, probably the wrong word, created as a consequence of local authorities not making their plans in time, right? That punitive action has been perfect because it hasn't hit them in the pocket because they don't have anything in the pocket. I think some local authorities are kind of almost blasé about the outcomes of planning appeals, that sort of stuff, because they can't get any more poor, right? They're just completely and utterly bankrupt. Going back to my earlier point about them being well funded. So don't hit them in the pocket. There's no point. Hit the local councillor in the fact that if they haven't got a 5-year housing land supply, they will end up getting, right? They will end up getting 400 properties in their community that they don't want, rather than the 4 that are applied for. And that's the way to make it happen, is tough. Your presumption in favour of development, whatever they call it in the new paper, will stymie the objection to the plan.
Thank you. We have, just so you know, we've got a councillor here, an ex-councillor, Caroline Dibden, who's come forward here. Caroline, you can turn your microphone on. I just enabled it. If you'd like to speak as an ex-councillor, saying they just, one councillor simply can't hold up a local plan. They just get outvoted, speaking as an ex-councillor. If you'd like to expand on that, Caroline, we would be grateful.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was a local councillor for some years. Before that, I was actually on an AONB planning panel and the South Downs Joint Committee. So I've been in planning committees for about 20 years. One local councillor simply can't hold up a local plan. You know, it is voted on by the whole range of councillors. Even if you've got a select committee or a cabinet structure, one just simply would be outvoted by the others. You'd have to have the whole cabinet disagreeing with the local plan, which would be a nonsense because it's them who are putting the local plan forward. So I don't really see the argument that one local councillor, even if they had an interest, they would have to declare it as a pecuniary or prejudicial interest, and they would be disbarred from voting in any event. So there you go, that's my experience.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. We really thank you for your contribution. Right, so let's finish on a positive. We've talked about the challenges. There are many. It's not clear that the new white paper is going to give necessarily all the powers and answers needed. Stephen Terry, is there a way to have a better discussion with the public about the benefits of development to sell a positive message instead of the focus always being on the problems?
Yeah, I mean, Joy mentioned it earlier. We do it every single day, right? When you're doing an affordable housing development, the presumption is that the consultation process does what it says on the tin, which is to ask local people to comment on our proposals. Putting up a blank sheet of paper is a very difficult thing to do, right? So you can't have community design all of the time. Sometimes you can, but you can't have it all of the time. So what we tend to do, and Joy, tell me if you do it differently, but we tend to do a scheme and we specifically go out and we describe to the local community why we've done this, what the tenure is, why it looks like that, what the specification is, what the timescale is, how we're going to do allocations, how we're going to do sales, all of those sort of things as an involved stakeholder in that community. We do that every single day. Make the development industry do it and make them do it properly, right? If you're doing a sustainable urban extension, part of the word sustainable is that community consultation. So the development industry should be doing it, but as Ruben's alluded to, it's not necessarily the developer, it'll be a landowner or a promoter or somebody third party who has absolutely no interest in the community whatsoever. They just want the cash associated with their fee to do the promotion. So eradicate that bit and say the developer has to do that consultation meaningfully with the community every single time. Solves that problem.
Yeah. So I totally agree, and I also think the thing that we hear a lot in consultation is that you didn't, not you, but we've seen this before, we've had consultation, what went in at the beginning of the planning process is not what we've now got at the end of the day, and that goes back to Ruben's point earlier about uncertainty, about negotiation. You know, ultimately, especially on large scale developments that can take 10 years to go through that process and actually be finalised. And what we hear time and time again from communities is we've been promised all of this before. So we have had, you know, developers coming to us saying, here's a plan, this is what you're going to get. And actually 10 years down the line, when we go and have a look at that development, none of that's there. The park's gone, the play equipment's gone. We didn't get that school's contribution. There isn't 40% affordable homes on it. There's 3 affordable homes stuck in a corner with no parking. And we have to do, as Duncan said before, what we do a lot of is come and have a look at what we've done before, come and have a look at what we said we would do, and then have a look at what we've actually done. And look, it's nearly development. It's pretty much the same thing. You know, if we told you this is what we were going to do, this is what we've done. And it's that same thing of certainty up front, proper, meaningful consultation with people about things that they actually care about, but also being open and honest with people. In consultation sessions, we have to say no. We have to say to people when, you know, they come back and say, actually, what we want here is a development of 50 bungalows, you know, and it's talking them through why developing 50 bungalows is not the right option for viability purposes, for local needs purposes, for grant, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But don't treat people like they're stupid and they won't understand. So be open and transparent about that. And that's, let's be honest, that's not what the big developers do, because they don't have to, because they're not invested in that community. They're not coming back to it. Once they've sold them, they're, you know, they're moving on to the next and the next and the next. And let's be honest, because people need homes, they don't even have to be that bothered about reputation. because there's certain developers that nobody would buy a house from if people were that bothered about reputation, looking what's in the media, what's in the press. But the truth is the need far outweighs that kind of reputational issue. And it always will, as long as we have this huge pressure on home ownership and this, you know, this need for housing. So make everybody do the same thing and make it meaningful, but be open and transparent. We're not just going to be able to develop hundreds of bungalows with local letting criteria on them everywhere that we're developing, but tell people why, be open about it.
In my perfect world, and this is a personal view, that would be front loaded. Those discussions would be at the local plan stage and at the design code stage. And if those conversations are done right and there's local buy-in, and again, it's a personal view, I frankly don't see why that level of consultation you're talking about should be inherent in the system at all. I feel like if there are rules that have been decided on, developers meet the rules, we have a housing crisis, set up and build homes.
Just a final point, Chris, before we move on, is around the consultation period, and John, you must have experience in this. I've done rural exception sites where I've started a consultation, I've gone off and done 3 jobs, come back to the organisation, and we've only just delivered what I started 10 or 12 years ago. And that, it just gives fatigue to that community, and the people who have supported you, as in I need affordable housing, have now themselves moved to 4 different places. You know, it's kind of like the time is really, really important to individual families. Consult, deliver. Don't consult, deliver.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap up now. It's 11:15. We're already 15 minutes over time. Thank you, everyone, for taking part today. I think this has been a really useful discussion, and hopefully we've covered all the key points in a very short amount of time. So this is what we really like to do on our webinars. So thank you very much for that, for everyone who tuned in. On our website, you'll see our next webinar is upcoming, and that is going to be, I'll just quickly share my screen so you can all see it. That is going to be in the 21st of July. It's going to be the key drivers in viability. So it's a live viability workshop is essentially what we're going to be doing. So hopefully you can register for that on our website. We hope to see you soon. I would love to thank Joy Winnerock, Duncan Smith, and Ruben Young. You all just did such a superb job. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully all of you in the future. So that's it from us now. Thank you very much, and let's goodbye.
Thanks everyone, see you later.